market was a little weak today with the SPY down 0.57%, closing at 563.51 after this huge run up that we've seen over the last several weeks. The SPY traded from 480 to 560 in just a matter of about 3 weeks. So a really huge run up, and now we've seen just a little bit of a pullback here after coming to some major levels that we've had our eye on. We've now had 3 consecutive trading sessions above the 50-day EMA, which is sitting at 556.17. We were discussing this in this morning's live stream, which you can sign up for. I'll put a link in the description below. This is one of the larger technical markers that we've been watching for, and we crossed above that last week. Another indicator that I've got here on my chart is the anchored VWAP. That's this blue line sitting at 529.44. The cool thing about an anchored VWAP is you can anchor it to a particular point in time. In our case, we've anchored it to this April 7th low, and so this is actually the closing point on this April 7th candle, analyzing the volume weighted average price since that date. You can see we actually tested it here in the middle of April, and the market has been trending higher ever since that point. I do think it is possible, if we see any kind of major rejection from these levels, that this anchored VWAP could serve as an important support area. We do see this does line up with this gap going back to April 22nd. In fact, we did adjust our hedge in one of our portfolios. We added a SPY put debit spread hedge in order to give us some protection for this very scenario, with the idea being if the market does reject down potentially 30 or 40 points on the SPY, this would serve as a fairly low risk, high reward type of play.
Thanks, Anthony. Let's take a look at IWM. I have our GEX data graph pulled up from our website, and you can see IWM never really quite got off the floor as far as the negative GEX goes, and a lot of these larger strikes are on the negative side as well. I do want to point out that we did have some positive GEX show up at this 210 area, and you can see that IWM has at least held this whole moving average for the most part as markets have attempted to rebound. Now today, interestingly, we closed at the exact price as the whole moving average at 198.94. Now we did have some pretty high volume at 190, and on our live stream earlier today, Anthony, you even pointed out that we've seen this big 190 strike here for the better part of several months now. So if we see a pullback from the whole moving average and end up hitting this 190, bulls are going to want to see that level hold to not open the door to these lower strikes. Maybe if we see a rebound after that, we could see a situation where a lot of this negative GEX finally unwinds, and that could help to fuel a gamma squeeze for IWM to play what I'll call a late game of catch up with the indices to the upside. Things don't always necessarily happen in the order in which we would like to see them happen, but we are right on the line, and we have 210 on the upside, 190 on the downside to watch.
Thanks, Sean. Next, let's take a look at Palantir. Palantir basically flat on the day, closing at 123.77. But I wanted to highlight this. The last 2 trading sessions sitting at all-time highs, huge candle today, but right up in here at this 123 to 124 zone that we saw hit back in February. The gamma exposure data continues shifting higher as we've been moving over the last 3 weeks, down from the 70s now all the way into the mid 120s. We're well above the 50-day EMA, and we've been hugging the 20-day whole moving average basically since this low back here on April 7th. Currently, there's a little bit of a battle going on between this 125 GEX and the 150 GEX for the largest gamma exposure concentration, but just in general, the net positive GEX between 120 and 160 is massive. So market participants are not shy about speculating for further gains in Palantir over the coming weeks and months. We've been really shocked to see how large the positive gamma exposure concentrations are getting at these higher strikes. Palantir coming up into this resistance zone, I wouldn't be surprised to see some sort of consolidation or potentially a pullback after this massive run up that we've had. But the way market participants are currently positioning for higher strikes, it's telling me that bullishness is still strong in Palantir and that any dip would likely be temporary and potentially bought for another leg higher. So we're continuing to watch these major gamma exposure levels between between 125 and 150, and we'll consider adding a very, very speculative position into our portfolio, which, by the way, you can follow along by signing up and becoming a member at geeksoffinance.com. I'll put a link in the description below. You guys can check that out whenever you get a chance.
Thanks, Anthony. Let's take a look at XBI. That's a sector-specific ETF that has representation of a lot of biotech companies. But what concerned me about the chart, you can see the largest cluster that we have here is at 75. Current price is at 82.65. And today we closed below the whole moving average, which is at 83.91. And we really don't see a lot of meaningful GEX clusters above this current price. The GEX is concerning, but then we also have the daily close below the whole. And if you look at what happened a day or two ago, I guess it was just Friday, we basically closed this gap going back to the end of March. And so we may have the ingredients here for a pullback toward the lower dealer cluster zone. So we'll want to keep an eye on XBI at this point.
Yeah, Sean, that XBI definitely looks right for a short play, and we'll most likely be adding a short strategy in one of our geek portfolios in the coming days. Thanks for mentioning that. Next, I want to take a look at Apple. Apple trading down today, down 3.15%, closing below 200. We've been eyeing the gamma exposure that's concentrated between the 190 and the 200 strike. Apple's actually in negative gamma exposure territory. It's below both the 50-day EMA as well as the 20-day whole moving average. Both of these are indicating that we are still in a downtrend. You can just see that from the price action as well. Below two major technical indicators and negative gamma exposure here, focused between 190 and 200. So Apple has really been struggling, in particular in the options chain where the skew is still slightly negative. One of the strategies I'm considering using to play this potential setup is focusing on this 200 strike, which is where most of the gamma exposure is currently sitting. And this would involve an iron butterfly strategy, something like the 190, 200, 210 iron butterfly. So this is selling the 200 calls and puts and buying the wings at 190 and 210. This type of strategy is a play based on premium collection. So if price can stay somewhere in this zone, let's say over the next several weeks, we could collect premium as price centers around that 200 strike. Of course, we do have to keep our eye on the gamma exposure at some of these higher strikes in case there is a shift out of this zone. That's something we would want to be aware of in terms of risk. But as long as we remain below both the 50-period EMA as well as the 20-period HMA, and in negative gamma exposure territory, I would be comfortable trying to collect premium within this 20-point range, which essentially allows for 10% movement between these levels on Apple.
I've got one more for us today. Let's take a look at Lowe's, the popular home improvement retailer. Lowe's has positive GEX, and while a lot of stocks seem sort of stretched right now, Lowe's seems to have a setup for a potential upside. We have the lower dealer cluster zone at 220. For now, we're holding the whole moving average at 224. Current price is 225, and we saw volume today at 230. Not a lot of GEX there, though, but what has my attention is a lot of GEX at 250. So I looked at our 3D map, and a lot of that GEX at 250 is out into June. So I wouldn't necessarily expect to see huge gains in the next day or two, but Lowe's does have a setup to potentially move toward this upper dealer cluster zone in the 250 range. As long as the GEX picture, remains supportive of that, that looks like a good probability to happen.
And guys, if you want access to our gamma exposure dashboard, our algorithmic trading strategies, as well as following along with all the moves we're making in our own portfolios, head on over to geeksoffinance.com. You can sign up and become a member. Our premium members also get access to our community Discord. We've got a ton of great traders in there sharing their own trade setups and strategies as well. It's something you definitely don't want to miss. Link in the description below. Thanks so much, everybody, for watching, and we'll see you guys in the next video.